The night of carnival, for most, a time for celebrating life. However, tonight in an empty alleyway a troubled one looks to the sky with unbearable longing and dashed hopes. The troubled one knows this sensation all too well, but up until this moment, he had never understood it. For all his life, the troubled one had kept dear the company of another. His guardian, his mentor, his dependable colleague, and most notably his best friend. Seldom had the troubled one envisioned leaving her side, for he cherished her protection. With her, he believed he lived the most ideal life imaginable, and he had been content with her companionship and, by extension, his own confinement. For the troubled one was happy with imprisonment, though he never admitted it as such. Not once in his life did he envy the freedom-loving inhabitants of the outside world. To him, familiarity was reassurance, and reassurance was happiness. But as of months late, every time the moon shone its light into the troubled one's abode, he wandered into its rays and peered up to it with a gnawing, vacuous sensation in his chest. The troubled one tried to make sense of his emotions. What was missing? Why at night did he gaze at the starlit black sky? The troubled one had no desire to explore, no yearning for freedom, and no pull to adventure. What was it that could possibly be keeping him roused? Surely, he thought, his protector offered him all that he needed. What else was there? For the ravaging emptiness that the troubled one felt night after night was the result of his lifelong isolation. His caretaker treated him exceptionally well, but the troubled one was still lacking something desperately crucial. Yet the troubled one could not identify the cause of his anguish. His nightly thoughts became misery that occasionally descended into borderline agony. What was wrong with him? As the troubled one would find out, life has a tendency to throw its hosts on the path forward. One night, the troubled one found himself thrust out into the world of unfamiliarity, a great distance from home. Separated from his protector and surrounded by fresh threats, the troubled one could not be certain as to whether he would live through the next day. It just so happened that on this night, the troubled one was bound to a remarkably beautiful stranger. The damsel had obviously not been impressed with the troubled one's liking for what she considered a meaningless existence of enslavement. To her, life was freedom, and freedom was happiness. The troubled one was sleepless once again, his mind alive with anxieties and fears. As it had been throughout the day, however, for the first time in months, the terrible, empty sensation was absent. This did not pass by without the troubled one's notice. However, the troubled one brushed it off. After all, today had been a day of unprecedented occurrences. Still, the troubled one found oddly that the presence of the damsel was soothing in a way that his caretaker never had been. The following day, the troubled one and the damsel, still physically bound to each other, found that their feelings for each other had grown stronger. In a moment of realization, the troubled one recognized that he wanted, more than anything, to wrap the damsel in his wings, press her chest to his, and promise to be devoted to her forever and always. It was at this time that the troubled one grasped the cause of his prior insomnia. For the troubled one had been happy, but lonely, unbearably lonely. And in the absence of it, he felt more joyful than ever. Now the chain that bound the two has been removed, and the damsel is free to continue the life of independence she wanted. The troubled one looks up to her from below. He knows for certain that he is infatuated with her, and the deepest, most desperate desire of his heart is to share the rest of his life with her. Despite this, the troubled one feels the soul-wrenching sensation of loneliness, reader, and it is far stronger than it had ever been. Because for his entire life, the troubled one has been chained to the ground. In this moment, the troubled one has two realizations. The first is that nature is cruel, and the troubled one would be destined for a life of imprisonment. He now painfully accepts that term as the reality. The second is that the damsel whom he had become attached to greatly values a life of freedom and significance, and the troubled one could do nothing but hold her back. The damsel would be better off without the presence of the troubled one. So, making the hardest decision of his life, the troubled one lets her go. Reeling with agonizing hopelessness, he hopes with futility that the damsel would forget him quickly.